Hello, everyone, and today I want to talk about the last great war chief of the Crow Nation, Joe Medicine Crow, and how he terrorized the Germans during World War II. So, if hearing about a Native American just run amok in Germany sounds like fun to you, stick around and listen to me ramble. Born in October of 1927 near Lodge Grass, Montana, Joe Medicine Crow grew up being raised by his tribal elders to be a warrior, as they taught him many important things such as conquering fears, tracking Arctic survival, and the like. And he also learned a lot about the nation's great heroes, which was kind of an important thing for him, as not only was he the last living person with a direct oral history to the Battle of Little Bighorn, but his step-grandfather, whose name was, and I'm not making this up, White Man Runs Him, was a scout for Colonel Custard during the battle. Now, his father was friends with Chief Plenty Coup and convinced Chief Coup to basically convince the government to acknowledge the importance of the Crow Nation and their ancestral land. And the long and short of it is he talked to him into not dissolving the tribe, and Chief Coup was considered the last great chief of the Crow Nation. Now, these were all important figures that Joe grew up knowing and kind of understanding, so it kind of plays into like his sense of importantness within the tribe, I guess you could say. Chief Crow eventually, went on to get a degree in sociology and psychology from Linfield College and a master's degree in anthropology from USC in 1939. He started work on his PhD, but unfortunately that kind of came to a short end due to the war. He worked in, basically the support effort of it, shipping docks, building boats, everything like that, until he eventually just decided screw it and went to help directly, and he joined the U.S. Army. Which brings us to the path of him becoming a war chief. Now, the Crow Nation has 4 requirements to become a war chief. Now, those requirements are: you must strike an enemy, either alive or dead, take your enemy's weapon from them, successfully lead a war party, and lastly, you must enter an enemy camp and steal a horse. Now, serving as a scout for the 103rd Infantry, the first requirement was pretty easy, engage the enemy, fight the bad guy. And that training that Crow received as a child about, his warrior culture and how to fight and everything like that, he brought that with him into the battle. As he was known for, before he went to battle, he was known to paint traditional war paint on his arms and under his uniform. He would also keep a sacred eagle feather painted yellow that was said to give him protection under his helmet. Now, the second task that he completed was taking your enemy's weapon. It was a bit more difficult though, especially since by World War II trench warfare and that up-close fighting that the tribes were used to during the Plains Wars, and was kind of the status quo for basically all of humanity for the last 1,000 years. It wasn't really a thing anymore, so it was a bit more difficult, but Joe got it done. He got it done. During a raid on a small town held by the Germans, Crow went around the enemy lines to basically scout for a flank when he ran into a German soldier doing the same thing. And when I say ran into, I mean he literally bumped into him, physically. Joe was able to disarm him, and being the goated warrior he is, Joe dropped his rifle and fought the German hand in hand. He looked at him and was like, "Square up, bro. Come on, we're gonna fisticuff this. We're gonna fight like men." And so Joe won the fight. He had pinned the German to the ground and had begun choking him out. He was about to kill this guy with his bare hands, but decided to let him go when the soldier began screaming for his mother. So Joe was a bit of a badass who would fight fairly, but also knew when death wasn't necessary. Goated. Come on. The man knew when to be peaceful and when to be violent. This meant that he had taken an enemy's weapon, and if you want to count that along with striking an enemy, you have a specific incident of him striking his enemy as well. A little later in the war, Joe's company was taking part in the Battle du Push across the Siegfried Line, which was Germany's defensive line across the Rhine. Joe was tasked with taking 7 men, going to a friendly defensive position that had been wiped out, grabbing the explosives there, and basically making his way to the defensive line and blowing a hole in it. All along the way, he was crossing barbed wire, enemy small fire, and artillery. It was basically a suicide mission. His commander was even quoted saying, "If anyone can do this, it's Joe." And somehow, the crazy bastard managed to do it. Joe managed to maneuver the line and blow a hole in the German defense with no casualties. Supposedly, there's even a photo of Joe crossing the German defensive line and being the first American in Germany. However, I couldn't find it, but it's out there somewhere, supposedly. Meaning, in all this basically culminated to, he led the war party successfully. And that leads us to the most difficult task, stealing a horse. This was the 40s. Horses weren't really a thing people used that often anymore, but they were in Europe still, so it wasn't impossible. Towards the end of the war, while scouting ahead for his unit before a major battle, Crow spotted SS officers on horseback setting up camp for the night on a farm. Crow reported this to his commander and said he'd prevent any kind of cavalry attack. Crow snuck into the farm at the dusk of night, wait for them all to get drunk, go to bed, do whatever they were doing, snuck in quietly, sneakfully, and hopped on a horse bareback and with a makeshift bridle and led the horses off the farm. He stole about 50 horses while making a traditional Crow War chant and singing native songs, which the visual of that is just, I don't know, it's really funny to me because you just think about trying to explain that to someone who's like, yeah, some dude broke into the barn, stole all of our horses while chanting like an American Indian in one of those Western movies that they make all the time. Like, I can't explain it, dude. Like, it was fucking weird. We couldn't stop him. He was just too quick. Joe Medicine Crow was just too badass for us. With all these tasks complete, Joe was officially, he completed all the requirements to become a war chief. And after the war, Joe returned home and told the tribal elders of his actions during the war, and they didn't even question it. They granted him the title of war chief, and he became the tribe historian. Basically, his job later in life after the war was he was documenting and preserving the tribes, as well as frequently speaking at universities and reenactments of the Battle of Little Bighorn. He even wrote the script for the reenactment. Aside from those, he, for the most part, kind of went on to live a normal life. In 2009, he was awarded the Presidential Freedom Medal. He wrote some books, gave some interviews, but I couldn't really find much outside of him talking about his actions to gain the title War Chief and, his speeches at the Battle of Little Bighorn reenactments. One thing I thought was really interesting was, after the war, he spent a lot of his life, promoting education amongst the tribes and just kind of, telling them, you gotta learn. School is important, which was great, and I thought that was awesome. He's even quoted as saying, with education, you're the white man's equal. Without education, you're the white man's victim. And now, I don't know if, obviously I'm not one to say about the intricacies of the tribal culture and strifes and issues within them, but I mean, it's true, or I shouldn't say true. It's, education is important. You've got to go to school. And when asked about the war, specifically the Plains War, Joe's quoted as saying, "No one wins. Both sides lose. The Indians, so-called hostiles, won the battle of the day, but lost their way of life. The worst enemies are ourselves." And that was his life until his death in 2016 at the age of 102. Joe was just kind of an interesting figure, and I wanted to share his story because that's really cool to me. Like, this, it's one of those weird things in history that you never really hear about. Like, if you had told me, like, it's almost hard to believe. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, there was a war chief in World War II, like, for the Americans. Like, a Native American war chief was just kind of running around causing chaos for the Germans. Like, that's awesome. That's cool to me. And it should be noted that he had a nephew that fought in Vietnam and almost got the title of war chief. He had done everything except for steal horses, but supposedly he did steal elephants, but the tribe said no, that doesn't count, it has to be horses, which I think is kind of bullshit. I feel like stealing an elephant is a lot harder than stealing a horse, so that guy should also be considered a war chief. But who am I to say? I don't know, I'm not a part of the tribe. With all that being said, if you actually sat there and listened to me ramble about this, thank you. I really appreciate it. For those of you that for some reason actually enjoy watching a lot of my content and watch it regularly when I put it out, you're probably wondering where I've been for the last, I don't know, few months. The long short of it is I've been in South Florida helping rebuild after Hurricane Ian hit. And that's kind of been my life the last few months. Hopefully with New Year and everything like that, I'm staying back at home and I can start doing this more and more in my free time and can actually get some videos out because I like talking to people about random things on the internet. Most of the things I talk about on here are things I have no one like that actually wants to listen to me ramble about them. So I ramble to you all because you guys like listening to me ramble for some reason. And I really appreciate that. So if you liked the video and you liked listening to me ramble, go watch me ramble about some other stuff. I don't know. I've got some of these things on here. Subscribe if you want. I don't know. Follow me on social media. I do whatever you want, dude. I don't care. But I hope you have a good day. I love you. Bye-bye.